What's up guys, Shawnthebro here, and we're back for another episode of the fighting game tutorial series, and specifically the 3D fighting game tutorial series. So we're converting our 2.5D fighter to 3D as an optional bit of side content. Of course, you don't need to do this if you don't want a 3D fighter like Tekken, but if you do, you've come to the right place. And specifically, we're going to be working on hitboxes and 3D hitboxes part 3 today. In the previous few episodes of the 3D conversion, we were able to get our simple and complex hitboxes changed based on the mode we were in. So if we use our cheat to enable 3D mode, which is cheat enable 3D mode true, we go to our complex hitboxes, which are not just squares, but they are actually representative of different parts of our characters. And in the previous episode, we made it so that we could spawn a 3D hitbox. As you can see, it's right here, not in the right spot exactly. But all we cared about in the previous episode is that it was spawning with our character. And you can see that is spawning with our character. It's not exactly where we want it to be, but it is moving with our character. And it is a 3D hitbox for sure. You can see the proximity hitbox is definitely a 2D hitbox. That's the yellow one to the right of my character. But the strike hitbox, or the red one, is definitely a 3-dimensional hitbox. For today's episode, we're going to make sure that we can use an attack and it will actually put the hitbox in the right spot. And when we do that, our 3D hitboxes will be done, and we will be able to consolidate the logic if we want, so that 2D and 3D hitboxes are in the same function call. But also in the 2.5D fighter, we're cleaning up the hitbox logic already. So there's plenty more improvements to be made with our hitboxes. And as long as we can get it working in today's episode and in the position we want, regardless of where we are, we will be absolutely golden for our 3D hitboxes going forward. Now, before we hop into this episode, if you want to get caught up in the series and check out all the cool things that we've done to date, such as our practice mode, our settings, our different maps, and a lot more, I'll link you to the entire playlist right here in the top right corner so you can see every single thing we've done to get to this point. Alternatively, if you only care about hitboxes and specifically 3D hitboxes, then I will link you to the first episode of our 2.5D to 3D conversion for our hitboxes in the series, because we will be building on top of those other 3D hitbox episodes to accomplish what you see in today's episode. With that out of the way, we can go ahead and get started. Now, this is a code and blueprint tutorial series. The positioning of our hitbox is done in the blueprint. We can change anything in the code later for the hitboxes that we need to, if we need to, but for now, let's go to our blueprints. The animation blueprint is what spawns the hitbox, because certain frames of the animation, we spawn our hitbox, and that's what determines the location of the transform. So we want to go to our blueprints, animation blueprints, and our mutant anim BP. Now that we're in here, let's go to our create hitbox 3D, because this is where we were doing the math to spawn the hitbox. This is the additional logic that we're doing to make the hitbox appear in the center of the character, or a little bit to the left of the character where you were seeing it before. So we were taking the transform of the player, splitting it up so we could see the location, rotation, and scale. Then we were taking the hitbox transform location, or essentially the offset of where we want the hitbox to appear from the character that's spawning it. We were getting the forward vector, so determining where the character was facing that's going to be spawning this hitbox. And we were multiplying it by the offset I mentioned earlier, specifically the y-axis. And we were adding it to the location to then set the new hitbox transform location. So this would be where we actually want to spawn the hitbox in the world. Because an offset's great, it tells us where it is from the character, but we need to apply that to our character's location for it to actually succeed. And that's what we did. But this math isn't entirely complete. And one of the main reasons that's not entirely complete is actually because our characters, while they were 2D, they weren't really ever oriented the correct way since the beginning of the series. It didn't affect us because of the environment we were using it in with the 2D and the flipping of the meshes and things. But when we come into a character here, such as our mutant BP, you'll see that there is an arrow component, and it has that blue arrow pointing out of the center of the mutant's chest. This is the direction of the front of the actor. So based on this, you can tell the direction of the front of the actor is not facing the way that the mutant is facing. And if we go to our character's static or skeletal mesh, we can see that they have rotation on them that we applied, and it doesn't line up with the arrow. So if we change this, in my case from -180 to 90, the character now faces the direction of the arrow. Since we're using this for a 3D fighter at this point, we do need to make sure that is oriented correctly. So go ahead and make sure that the front of your character is facing that arrow. And if we go and launch our game, we're going to see some weird things, or seemingly weird things. Really, it makes perfect sense because we changed the rotation of our character. But when we come in here, our character is now going to be facing the screen and not oriented how we expect. However, this is a simple fix. If we come into one of our levels, which determines where our player starts are, which determine the orientation of our characters, we will see the issue. So if we go to our side-scroller example map that we have in our game, we see that the arrows are pointed toward the camera. And remember, based on what we just saw in our mutant BP, if the arrow is pointing toward the camera, the character is facing to the right. The same really applies for the flipped character. We are flipping the mesh, but that's not changing the front of the actor. So it makes sense that everything appeared correctly. But now with our changes, we want to rotate the player starts to both face to the right, the same direction as the mutant BP, and really our base character in general. So any of your characters that have that rotation should be adjusted. So for the player starts, I changed them from 180 or negative 180 to 90 as well. And we can save the level and then go and play our game again. Switch back to the persistent level. And when we come into the game, you'll see that we are oriented correctly and things appear to be working. But if we switch to 3D mode, now we're facing the wrong way again. This is due to some hard-coded logic we put up in the 3D episodes to actually orient the character with that 90-degree offset. That 90-degree offset was only required because of our incorrectly oriented character and player starts. So now we can go into the code, go to our fighter template character, and we can go to our tick function. And in our tick function, we will find a section where we are rotating the character based on if it's 2D or 3D mode. If it is 3D mode, then we call this function rotate toward opponent 3D. So we want to go to this function. And in here, which we set up a few episodes ago, we find the direction we should be facing and we point the character that way. But the problem is we were applying this 90-degree offset to the yaw of the rotation that we were using for the character. If we take that line away now, we'll get rid of that hack, and then the next time we go to play the game, when we convert to the 3D mode, we are now going to be oriented correctly. And you'll see our hitbox will follow us around properly, so things are looking better now. Let's hop into the other levels and make sure they all follow this new orientation. So any maps that we have should have the player starts facing the same way, both to the right, or at least uniform. However you set it up is fine, but I recommend doing this because otherwise you're going to have to calculate it differently for your series everywhere. So if you're just following what I'm doing, it will be easy. And we want to go to our training room and do the same thing. You can either access these levels through the Levels tab under Window and go and make your level visible and edit it, or just go to the map itself. Either way is fine. But I'm just going to change the rotation of all these to 90 degrees. So we have our training room, like I said. We have our side-scroller example map, which we did earlier. We have Trail of the Wise, which is my other map. Thank you, Shadow Magnus. Appreciate that. And we want to orient these rotations the same as the others. So just change these player starts. And we have one final map as well. I have one called the Refinery. Also, thank you to Shadow Magnus. And when we come in here, you'll see that the same thing needs to be applied here. So orient these all properly, and then go back to your persistent level when you're ready, and you can go ahead and test again. We want to make sure that we do the same thing with the characters that we just did with the maps. So we should go to our base character BP and convert our rotation to the new value. So you'll see here it's negative 540. If I go to my mutant BP, it is negative 540, or it was, and now it's negative 90. So we can make the change in the base character BP to be negative 90, and this should be good for all the characters. But if any of your characters were different and they don't line up with the arrow, then make sure you update it so that they do line up with the arrow. And then we need to go back to the animation blueprint and go to the logic I was showing you earlier where we were offsetting our hitbox. With these new changes that we implemented, this will work, but we do need to apply a -1 to our Y value that's coming in, as at this point it will be reversed. We can clean this up in a future episode of the hitbox cleanup like I was mentioning earlier, but for the 3D conversion, multiplying this by -1 will be enough. I'll do some quick cleanup here, then we'll test it. So when we're running again, you can see that this is working as expected. Now the hitbox is appearing in front of us regardless of our orientation, which is excellent. There's one other thing we want to fix, and that is the orientation of our fireball. You may have a few more instances where the rotation or the movement is messed up because of the changes we made in today's episode. And if we find any more in this series, we will fix them. But specifically the case I see is the fireball. If we go to blueprints, functional blueprints, and projectiles, we can go through our blueprints that we have here. We have our base projectile BP and our horizontal projectile, which is our fireball for right now. You may want to go through all of yours, but these are the ones that I tested that had issues. The other ones look good. So if I go to my base projectile BP, everything should check out, and it does. And if we go to our horizontal projectile, everything should also check out except the velocity. The built-in velocity actually is fine, but if we go to class defaults and look at the velocity that we manually applied and that we're keeping track of, it is 1000 on the y-axis, and based on where I was firing it, we should be using the x-axis instead. So I'll put 1000 on the x-axis and test it. When testing it, we can see it's firing backward, so I want to apply -1000 velocity. And in doing that, it looks correct. And this is specifically for the 2D and 2.5D, but you can use it in 3-dimensional space, and it should come out the same way as expected. So when we were in 2D or 2.5D, we don't have 3 axes, we only have the 2. But if we go to our library BPs, mutant hitbox data, and we go to one of our hitboxes here, if we go to the one that we're using, you can see that location has our XYZ, and I'm using the same values as I was for the 2D and 2.5D one. This means I have access to my X location now, so if I want, I can apply an offset in here as well. This would be your depth when you're looking at it from 2D view. At this point, you should be able to modify your hitboxes and they will move along with your character in 2D and 3-dimensional space. If you enjoyed this episode and it helped you create your 3D hitboxes in your fighting game, then please subscribe and consider supporting the Patreon, YouTube membership, and Discord subscriptions to benefit the channel and myself. I am very, very grateful for all the kind souls who have and continue to do so. Thank you all so much. If you ran into any problems following this tutorial or any of my tutorials, feel free to join the Discord community. There is a link in the description, and I would be happy to help you out with any problems you ran into. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'm Shawnthebro, and I'll see you in the next episode. Goodbye, guys.